Assalamu alaikum. Hope everyone's doing well. Salam, Sheikh. This is the part 2 of the Azadari rituals with Sheikh Nami Farhat. We'll start by Sheikh giving us a brief lecture, and we'll have some questions and answers from then. Bismillah, Sheikh.
Thank you very much. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu ala Muhammadin wa alihi at-tayyibin at-tahirin. Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. Respected brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. So inshallah, this is our second session speaking about what is known as the Husseini rituals. And briefly, last session we started by defining the meaning of rituals from a linguistic and religious aspect. And we spoke about the origin of self-flagellation or tadbir, or hitting the head. And we saw together that there is no religious evidence or narration supporting this certain practice that is done. And the common view that it was from the Christians of Al-Quqas. For today, for this session, I will try my best to squeeze everything and as much as possible to cut it short so we can end it with 2 sessions, although there are a lot of information that need to be discussed and other rituals too, besides self-flagellation. But I think if we give the jurisprudential perspective about hitting the head or self-flagellation, we can apply it to other rituals that are practiced during Muharram. For the first point tonight, or in this session, is tadbir considered one of the symbolic rituals? So we defined the symbolic ritual and we said that it is something that is used to promote religion. And it's not religion itself, as we explained. It's just there to advertise for the principles that you believe in. So can we classify tadbir or hitting the head as a symbolic ritual or not? Now, I want the brothers and sisters, especially those who will listen to the recording later on, to be patient with me to the end of the discussion. So don't get emotionally or react emotionally while I'm giving the point, because maybe in certain parts I will be supporting maybe those who are pro-tadbir and in certain parts going against them. Because as I said last time, in any discussion, especially fiqh discussion, we shouldn't put a conclusion at the beginning. So we have to go step by step until we reach the conclusion. All right, so is tadbir or self-flagellation, is it considered a symbolic ritual or not? One of the scholars, one of the famous scholars, Sayyid al-Khu'i rahmatullahi alayh, and most of his students, for example, Mirza Tabrizi rahmatullahi alayh, they both don't consider tadbir or hitting the head as a symbolic ritual. You can refer to the book Siratun Najat, volume 1, page 432, in the questions and answers about whether it is a symbolic ritual or from the Sha'a'ir. They said it's not. The reason why these scholars don't consider self-flagellation or hitting the head from the symbolic rituals is because they limit the symbolic rituals to the textual proofs. So they believe that for something to be classified as a sha'ira or a symbolic ritual, it must have a textual proof, a verse and an authentic narration. And when we look at tadbir, as we explained in the last session, there's no narration, authentic narration that support this action. So therefore, it cannot be classified as a symbolic ritual according to them. However, if we go back to the definition that we gave last session and understand that a symbolic ritual is not something that is part of religion. It's just something to help in promoting a message that you believe in, to advertise a message that you believe in. If you accept this definition and you argue against the view of Sayyid al-Khu'i and say there's no need for a textual proof for the way you promote religion. Some of the symbolic rituals are part of religion, like Hajj. But some of the symbolic rituals or some of the means that you use in promoting the religion or promoting the message that you have, they don't need to have a textual proof. Based on that, and this is something that I personally accept, I accept that there's no need for a textual proof to accept a symbolic ritual. If this symbolic ritual helps in promoting the message that you believe in, there's no problem, as long as it meets certain conditions. So it must meet certain conditions in order for it to be accepted, even if it doesn't have a narration. So to make this point, to clarify this point, if we look today at anything that is practiced by the Shia, for example, let's say, because we just finished from the 40th of Imam al-Hussein, the Arba'in, the day that is known as Al-Arba'in of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. Okay. Ziyaratul Arba'in, this action where people will walk from Najaf to Karbala and they go on the 20th of Safar. Some of them, they accept certain narrations or one narration that is maqbula, accepted, although it's not authentic, but is accepted. While other scholars, they believe that there's no textual proof or an authentic evidence for Al-Arba'in, for Ziyarat Al-Arba'in. But when they saw the positive outcome that they believe in this ziyarah, that it's helping in promoting the message of Imam al-Hussein, it's showing the generosity of the people. All the news are covering this war. Everyone is speaking about it. When they saw this positive outcome, they promoted or they accepted this action of ziyarah, although it has no authentic evidence. Why? Because some scholars, they don't limit the symbolic rituals to the textual proofs. But for those who limit the symbolic rituals to textual proofs, like Sayyid al-Khu'i and some of his students, then they can't accept something to be practiced if it doesn't have a narration, an authentic narration, or an accepted narration, or a verse. So this is why we can, or I can classify tadbir or self-flagellation, if it meets certain conditions, as a symbolic ritual, as a sha'ira. What are these conditions that we must search for in order to accept something as a symbolic ritual or not? So we want to advertise for our movement. We want to advertise for our cause. And we don't want to limit ourselves to the narrations or the verses. We want to find new ways to promote this path. All right. When we want to choose something or practice something, it has to meet two conditions. Number one, any symbolic ritual that you want to take, it can't contradict the laws of religion, because you are there to promote religion. Sha'a'ir, a symbolic ritual, is a means for you to promote your religion. So it can't go against the commands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, this action of hitting the head, self-flagellation, does it go against the laws of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or not? Some people may argue that hitting the head, it causes a certain type of harm which goes against the laws of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. However, the scholars of jurisprudence, when they come to the discussion of harm, they have a principle that they base their discussion on. It's called قاعدة لا ضرر ولا ضرار, no harm to oneself or harming others. It's based on some narrations that can be found in Wasa'il al-Shia. I'm not going to mention the narrations just to save time. So this principle that is famous, لا ضرر ولا ضرار, any harm against oneself or against others is not acceptable or is haram. When they come to this principle, they say it refers to the serious harm. What do they mean by a serious harm? A serious harm is a harm that causes you to lose your life or to lose a body part. This is the serious harm. Anything beneath this level of losing your life or losing a body part, permanently losing a body part, like cutting the hand, for example, chopping your hand off, anything beneath that is not haram, according to them. Now, if you look at tadbir or self-flagellation, hitting the head, or even when they use the zanjir or other stuff, usually, in most cases, it doesn't lead to serious harm. It doesn't lead to a serious harm. And because of that, we can't come and classify it as haram, as something that is forbidden, due to the minor harm that it can cause to certain individuals. So this is the first thing, the first condition, that it can't contradict with the laws of Allah. When we come to the action of self-flagellation, we don't find any ruling in religion that goes against this action. That's the number one. So based on the first condition, we can accept it as a symbolic ritual. Now we come to the second condition for something to be classified as a symbolic ritual or as a sha'ira. And it's one of the main, or it should be a very important condition for us to reflect upon. The second condition is to study the environment, to verify if the purpose of this symbolic ritual is fulfilled on a practical level or not. The symbolic ritual is a means for you to promote your religion, to advertise your religion. So in order for you to succeed in promoting your religion, you have to study the time and the place that you live in. Certain things that were practiced in the past or that were used in the past to promote religion may not be very beneficial today. So it is not right to limit our minds to the way people advertised religion in the past. Keep in mind here, we're speaking about the recommended symbolic rituals, not the wajib. We're not speaking about hajj, we're speaking about the recommended symbolic rituals that are not part of religion, how to advertise for your religion. One of our great scholars, Sheikh Nami, rahmatullahi alayhi, he issued a statement or a ruling in regards to self-flagellation, tadbir, or hitting the head, and he considered it to be permissible, that it's allowed and there's no problem in it. Most of the maraja of the Shia, they accepted the statement of Sheikh Nami, rahmatullah alayh, and they just added their signature under it. All right, so as an approval. So most of the scholars, I can say most of the scholars, they accept the opinion of Sheikh Nami because of his level of knowledge. Now we say, with all respect to Sheikh Nami, rahmatullah alayh, and to the scholars, regardless of their opinion, I say it is not right to just imitate the conclusions that scholars reached in the past without studying the time and the place that you live in today. Certain rulings can change based on the time and the place that you live in. Certain rulings that were halal can become haram. Certain rulings that were haram can become halal based on certain conditions, obviously. So for someone to be classified as a scholar, as a mujtahid, as someone who is able to reach conclusions someone that can ask people to follow or can ask people to follow them in religion. They can't just copy the views of the previous scholars. This Salafi, and I call it the Salafi mentality of just following our ancestors and what they reach from the scholars, is very dangerous. Same as you have a Salafi mentality in the Sunni school of thought, you also have a Salafi mentality in the Shia school of thought, where they just accept the mashhur, they accept what the scholars reach in the past. And this is not correct. So we have to study the time and place that we live in. When we look today at this action of hitting the head, self-flagellation or tadbir, we see that it gives a bad image for the school of thought of the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam. And this doesn't need a lot of discussion and explaining. Everyone can see the harm that it's causing for the image of the school of thought of the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam, with all the sacred message and or the sacred lessons that we have from Ashura and from the movement of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. We find that on the 10th day of Muharram, people around the world, they concentrate on those who are hitting themselves, and they take photos of those who are doing this tadbir, this action, seeing the blood coming down, and they try to promote the religion of Islam as a barbaric body religion. And those who practice this action, right, they are not helping in promoting the correct message of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, especially with all the political tension that we have today around the world against Islam. The last thing that you need to do is to promote your religion in a barbaric way, like they do. And due to this action causing harm to the image of the Shia school of thought, it can't be classified as a symbolic ritual, even if we don't limit the symbolic rituals to the textual proofs. So we argued at the beginning that we don't accept what Sayyid al-Khou'i said. I say there's no need for a textual proof. Even with that, we cannot classify the tadbir or hitting the head as a symbolic ritual, because the second condition of having it to promote the religion doesn't exist anymore. It's causing harm to religion, and this is why it can't be considered as a symbolic ritual. Now, we shouldn't limit, or it's wrong to limit this opinion to one place and say, for example, that in the West it shouldn't be practiced, but there's no problem to practice it in the Islamic countries. Because there is such an opinion among certain scholars. They say don't practice it in the West, because in the West it will give a bad image for the Shia. So, for example, don't go down in a marching in the city in the West. I don't know where you're living, let's say in Sydney or New York or London or other countries, marching with swords. They say, no, you don't do that, because it can cause a bad image for the Shia. But in Islamic countries, let's say in Iraq, in India, in other places, there's no problem, because the majority of people are Muslim. This is something that can't be accepted, because with today, with social media, with internet, the whole world became a small village, as they say. So from your house, you can see what's happening around you in the world. Today, here we are having this session, and there's people from different countries joining together. So you're able to see what's happening anywhere you are. So we can't limit it to one place only. Now, some respected brothers and sisters, and I think we received a question from last week in regards to practicing it privately. They say, all right, we accept that it can cause harm for the image of the Shia school of thought. And it's not a symbolic ritual because it doesn't meet the second condition of promoting religion. But what about if we practice it privately in our centers or at the house without anyone knowing, without anyone recording? We answer by saying that this action that you perform privately, it can't be considered as a symbolic ritual, as a sha'ira. Because we said the symbolic ritual is something to promote religion. Who are you promoting religion to? To yourself at home? To those who follow the path in your center? So it doesn't meet the second condition of promoting religion. And it can't be classified as a symbolic ritual. With that, it doesn't mean that it is haram yet. So we haven't reached the conclusion where we can say it's halal or haram. In that point, we're just seeing whether it's a symbolic ritual or not. And we saw that it can't be classified as a symbolic ritual. Now, I know some people are very sensitive when you tell them that tadbir or self-flagellation or even other rituals are not, so-called rituals can't be considered a symbolic ritual or a sha'air. They get very sensitive. But we should remind them that there's no sacredness for any ritual that we perform that is not part of religion. The sacred thing is Islam. What is sacred is Islam. And what is sacred is the movement of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. Right? Anything that helps in promoting this path of Islam, the path of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, becomes sacred. Anything that harms the message of Islam and harms the message of Abi Abdullah alayhi salam, it's not classified as a sacred thing. So it's more important to protect religion. It's more important to protect the correct message of Islam instead of circling around certain rituals that people came up with and they do not fulfill the conditions that we mentioned. All right. Now, some scholars they argue that even if self-flagellation and other practices that or actions that are practiced by Shia in Muharram, even if they are not considered a symbolic ritual, they will still be recommended or promoted because they fall under the category of Jazza. And I'll explain what the Jazza means. They translate the Jazza to deep grief or sadness. So deep grief or sadness. And they use the following narration, which is very, very common from speakers and even scholars on the pulpit. We always hear it. They say, كل الجزع والبكاء حرام مكروه إلا على الحسين عليه السلام. It is narrated from Muawiyah bin Wahab, from or attributed to Abi Abdullah, Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam, that he said, all of Jazza, so deep grief or sadness and crying is disliked, makruh, except for the Jazza and crying over al-Hussein alayhi salam. This narration is mentioned in Wasa'il al-Shia, volume 3, page 282. So very common, we hear it every Muharram. The Jazza, grief and crying is not recommended except on Imam al-Hussein. There's two problems, at least two problems. There's more problems in this narration, but we'll limit it to two. There's two problems in this narration. The first problem is in the chain. One of the narrators in the chain of this narration is Muhammad bin Ja'far bin Musa bin Qaylaway. Muhammad bin Ja'far bin Musa bin Qaylaway is the father of Ibn Qaylaway, the author of Kamil al-Ziyarat. Kamil al-Ziyarat is a very famous book that contains a lot of authentic narrations. Some scholars used to consider it to be all authentic. Sayyid al-Khou'i rahmatullah alayh in the beginning of his marja'iyya, used to consider Kamil Ziyad to be all authentic. Later on, he changed his view. So Ibn Qaylaway, sometimes he narrates narrations that includes his father in the chain, and sometimes he narrates narrations straight from his father. There's a discussion in Rijal when it comes to accepting the chains of narrations. Scholars, they say, or some scholars, they believe that the narrations that Ibn Qaylaway narrates directly from his father are accepted. Okay? But those that are not directly from him are not accepted. And based on that, we see in this narration that Muhammad bin Ja'far bin Musa bin Qaylaway cannot be classified as reliable. Cannot be classified as reliable. Different opinions. Some people may classify everyone that is mentioned in Kamil Ziyad as authentic. That's based on the method that they follow. But based on the method that we accept, we cannot just accept the authenticity of someone like Muhammad bin Musa bin Ja'far bin Qaylaway just because he is mentioned in Kamil Ziyad. The second narrator in this chain of narration is Abu Muhammad al-Ansari. Abu Muhammad al-Ansari is, in Ilm al-Rijal, they call him Majhul, unknown. Now, some scholars, they tried to strengthen the weakness of Abu Muhammad al-Ansari. And I apologize for going too much into Rijal, but I think it's good to give a bit of points in this knowledge because it is important. And usually the akhbaris, they don't like Ilm al-Rijal that much. But so inshallah, we'll just give a few points in that. So some people tried to authenticate Abu Muhammad al-Ansari by what Muhammad bin Abdul Jabbar mentioned in one of the narrations in Al-Kafi about him. He said, Kana khayran, he was good. He said he was good. Now, this statement, he was good, it doesn't prove that Abu Muhammad al-Ansari narrated authentic narrations. You can praise someone as a person. You say he's a good guy, he's a good person. But this doesn't prove that he was what? He was always accurate in everything that he narrated. So personal praise doesn't always show that he is accurate in narrating the narrations. And this is why, personally, I don't classify him as authentic according to that. However, and especially when you look at certain books of Rijal, for example, Ibn al-Ghadairi in his book Al-Rijal, Rijal Ibn al-Ghadairi, he says, many fabricated narrations used to reach Abu Muhammad al-Ansari. All right? So, Kana khayran, he was good. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala raise his rank. He was good. But it doesn't prove he was accurate in narrating the narrations. And then we see Ibn al-Ghadairi mentioning that a lot of fabricated narrations used to reach Abu Muhammad al-Ansari. So we can't have certainty that he was authentic in the narrations that he narrated. It's interesting to see that a great scholar in Ilm al-Rijal like Sayyid al-Khu'i rahmatullah alayhi, he accepts what is mentioned in Al-Kafi and the statement of Kana khayran, he was good, to authenticate Abu Muhammad al-Ansari. So according to Sayyid al-Khu'i, Abu Muhammad al-Ansari is considered as authentic. Although Ibn al-Ghadairi, he says that a lot of narrations used to reach him. And between two brackets, this is a message, especially for the students of knowledge. The students of knowledge who are studying in the Hawza. When it comes to Ilm al-Rijal, in the past few years, I noticed that many students, when they want to search for something, they just go to the book of Sayyid al-Khou'i. Mu'jam al-Rijal from Sayyid al-Khou'i. They search for the narrator, they find what's the view of Sayyid al-Khou'i, and based on that, they reach a certain conclusion to accept or to reject a narrator. And this is not correct, and it's not healthy. The views of Sayyid al-Khou'i rahmatullahi alayhi and Rijal are respected, but it doesn't mean that it's sacred. There's other books of Rijal. Don't limit yourself to one mentality or one scholar or one school. There's different schools that you'll find in the Shia school of thought that you can benefit from, but at least get to know the different views and then find your own through reading the different opinions that you have. Don't limit yourself to just one scholar because he is known and he is famous. There's plenty of other scholars who may be stronger than the one that you follow. It's also interesting to see that Sayyid al-Khou'i, when it comes to this narration, in one of his books, Kitab al-Tahara, he says that it has a good chain, Hasana. And then in another book, in Sirat al-Najah, he says that it's authentic. And I believe this was a mistake from Sayyid al-Khou'i to say it's authentic. And in another place, it says it's Hasan. So briefly, just to cut it short without going more into detail with the chain is weak when it comes to Jazza. If all the Jazza grief and crying is disliked except for Imam Hussein, this is a weak narration. Now, the second problem is with the content of this narration. When you look at the content of this narration, what does it say? That what is attributed to the Imam, that all grief and crying is disliked except for Imam Hussein. All right. Let's concentrate, because people concentrate on Jazza, but they forget the second thing that is mentioned, crying, which we can ask, who says crying is disliked except for Imam Hussein? What about the crying out of love for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or to repent to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Is this cry disliked? What about the cries that are mentioned in certain stories, for example, for Adam crying when he was sent out of paradise? Is his cries also makruh? What about the cries of Prophet Yaqub alayhi salam for Yusuf? The cries of Prophet Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, the cries of Sayyidah Zahra alayhi salam, the cries of Imam Zain al-Abidin alayhi salam, or the tears of Imam Zain al-Abidin alayhi salam. Many important personalities in religion used to cry. So how do you consider it to be disliked in this narration? Sayyid al-Khou'i, rahmatullah alayh, he obviously as a faqih, he noticed that there's a problem there, although he accepts this narration, but he noticed that there's a problem. So in an attempt for him to fix that problem, he said that the karaha, or when we say it's makruh, disliked, we're only referring to the social aspect of crying, and not the karaha, or being makruh, from a religious aspect. So this is how he tried to fix it. He said the karaha, it's disliked from a social aspect. From a social aspect, it's not appropriate for someone to cry. Urfan, it doesn't look good for someone to cry. So this is why it's disliked, not from a religious aspect. And this is something not accurate. And the interpretation or the attempt of Sayyid al-Khou'i to fix the content of this narration is not very accurate. Because number one, the Imam alayhi salam is there to teach us the rulings of religion, and not to give us the social perspective of a certain thing. If he speaks about something, he speaks about a religious ruling to us. So when he says it's disliked, It's not speaking from a urfi, from a social aspect, unless there's a sign to indicate that he's speaking from a social aspect. And there's no sign to say that. And number two, he says from a social aspect, crying is disliked, or crying is looked upon as a wrong thing. Not at all. Crying is an emotional reaction that people usually accept or respect and appreciate from someone that cries. Even if someone is in the highest level of leadership, it's not looked upon in a wrong way if they cry. So to say socially it's not accepted, it's not correct. So this is why we don't accept the interpretation of Sayyid al-Khou'i. And in general, again, without going into the details with all the narrations, because it's a long discussion, all the narrations that speaks about the karaha of al-Jazza, that al-Jazza, deep grief, is disliked, they are all weak narrations. Just this is a summary. And this is why I say showing deep grief or grieving or being sad or crying upon anything is allowed. Let it be for Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam or for anything else. If a loved one, someone that is dear to you, close to you, they go through a certain problem or they pass away, and then you show this deep grief or jaza or crying, there's no problem in that at all. It's allowed, and it reflects the humanity of that person. All right, so there's no problem in that, and al-jaza in general is allowed. Now, the third point. When it comes to this ritual of self-flagellation, can we classify it as part of jaza or not? I gave this long introduction to get here. Can we classify it as jaza, as deep grief or not? To be able to answer this question, it's important to repeat the definition of al-jaza. Al-jaza is the opposite of patience. It's to show grief, to show your sadness, and it's the opposite of patience. So, for example, if you refer back to the book Lisan al-Lisan, volume 1, page 84, they say al-jaza is the opposite of patience. And it is said he was not patient, so he displayed grief. Because he's not patient, he showed al-jaza. So, if I want to give an example to explain al-jaza and to link it to tadbir, if you look at a spring of water, just imagine now a spring of water. A spring of water, for it to exist, to appear on the surface, it takes time for water to fill the space behind the rocks and to reach a level where it explodes. From between the rocks, it explodes and water comes down straight away. So when it reaches a level that it is classified as full, then it pushes a place in between the rocks for it to explode and for this water to come out. This is how the spring of water comes out. Or the volcano, for example, when it explodes and it destroys everything around it, it happens after it reaches a certain level where it can't stay under the ground anymore. It's a reaction that happens immediately. Al-jaza, or deep grief, is something that happens immediately. It's an emotional reaction that you do not prepare for. Unintentional emotional reaction. This is what al-jaza is, unintentional, emotional reaction. Now, if we want to give this scenario, if someone is reciting the musibah of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, or reading the musibah of, or hearing the musibah of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, and suddenly they get to a stage where they just lose it, and they have a cup of, let's say, glass next to them. They bring this cup and glass, they hit their heads with it, and blood comes out. No scholar, even those who are against self-flagellation, would say that this is haram. Why? Because it's an emotional, unintentional emotional reaction. We say wrong, try to control yourself, to control your emotions, right? But we don't say it's haram, because why? It's not something that he intended to do. Unintentional emotional reaction. In other words, it's jaza. So this action of hitting the head, unintentionally, there's no problem in it. However, when it comes to the ritual that is performed by some Shia today, that is known as tadbir, or hitting the heads, or self-flagellation, there is no way for any sane person to consider it to be a jaza. There's no way. How would you consider something to be a jaza, or this action to be a jaza, where people take the intention to join a certain group that are performing it? They go and buy a shroud to wear, a white shroud to wear. They go and prepare, or they get certain swords or knives to hold. They sharpen this sword or this knife, and they stand in line, and they wait for their turn to come in order for someone to hit their heads and for this blood to come out. Can this be classified as an emotional, unintentional reaction or jaza? It's impossible for it to be classified like this. And this is why it can't be classified as a jaza. The same thing with the other rituals, with the other rituals that are performed. Hitting the chest, or crying, or whatever people perform, if it's done from the heart, unintentionally, as an emotional reaction, I'll tell you, you'll be rewarded for it. You'll be rewarded for it if it comes from your heart. But if you sit down and you fake it, and then you use some made-up narrations, in lam tabku fatabaku, if you don't cry, if you're sitting in listening to the musibah and you don't cry, pretend that you're crying. Pretend. This is a relation between you and Allah. Pretend that you're crying. I don't know what to say about that. To pretend, to fake it. You want to fake your emotions in a majlis when you're listening to the musibah. And this is where you sit down sometimes and you hear people screaming in a way that doesn't make sense to you. Who's louder? Everyone starts screaming louder when someone is reading the musibah. And it gets worse when the reciter is sitting on the pulpit and is being recorded, and then they start faking the cry. People are not stupid today, and forgive me for using this word. They're not simple today for things to pass through them without noticing. People notice the smallest things that a speaker or a scholar is doing on the pulpit. If you're faking it, people can tell that you're fake. Right? But obviously they will justify. Some people will justify by saying, there's a narration. If you don't cry, pretend that you're crying. Keep pretending with what you're doing in your life. If it comes from your heart, there's no problem. But if you prepare for it, if you stand and you do a circle and you want to beat your chest, and who's doing a harder, and let's take our shirts off, get shirtless in the center, and who can hit their chest harder. And this is not Jazza. This is not Jazza. This is a cultural dance that you're performing in the name of Imam al-Hussein. And it's funny how I see some Shia, they're making fun of Sufis. They say, look at Sufis, they're dancing at the mosques. Habibi, most of you jump up and down in your centers when it comes to Ashura. At least the Sufis are dancing for Allah. You're jumping up and down for Imam al-Hussein. You can't come and be so critical against others, and you don't look at what is being practiced in your places. It is true that we were raised, born to see these actions being performed in our centers, and we find it normal. And even sometimes maybe we join and we hit our chest and do certain rituals. But if you stop for a moment and you think, is religion just certain cultural practices and rituals that I was raised on? Or should I search to find whether this thing is accepted by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or not? Even for the love of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, for the love of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, if you want to show this love, you have to be smart and wise in finding the best way to promote this religion. Why today? Look, again, I'll mention about the Arba'in of Imam Hussein. Why people today, they concentrate, even non-Muslims, they concentrate on the Arba'in more than the 10 days of Muharram. You know that? Go and compare between the cover, the news, how they cover the 10 days of Ashura and then the 40th of Imam Hussein. They concentrate more on the 40th of Imam Hussein, although the 10 days are more authentic. But Arba'in is not authentic. There's no authentic evidence. But they concentrate more on it. Why? Because the 10 days of Muharram are full of rituals that no one can connect to. Not even our youth generation or the new generation that we have. They can't connect to it. But having small groups in your centers, crying, making up stories, finishing and doing, hitting your chest, performing certain rituals, bringing flags, bringing coffins in the centers. No one can connect to that. It's depressing. People, if someone wants to be religious and come and see all this environment and they want to find peace, they would probably commit suicide after seeing all this. But on the 40th of Imam al-Hussein, when they see people walking in a peaceful way, when they see the generosity of people with all the food that they give out for free, you see Muslims and non-Muslims are attracted and speaking in a positive way about it. Why? Because the message of Imam al-Hussein is promoted more in this new rituals, let's call them, that are being practiced today in the Arba'in, from the generosity of people, from the food, from the sweets, from the fruits, from the walk, and so on. It's a good thing, although it doesn't have any religious evidence. This is what I called it in one of my posts on social media, a good bid'ah hasana. There's no problem in that, a good innovation. And here we have to stop and think how to promote the message of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. Again, there's no sacred ritual except that which is wajib, like al-hajj, but from the recommended ones. There's no sacred ritual. What is sacred is the message of Islam. So if we reach a stage where we have to stand against a certain ritual because it's causing harm to the message of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, we should do it. Don't fear anyone. People are always scared, and not only people, even some scholars are scared to speak against it because they will lose the support. Don't be scared from anyone except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There is an amazing narration from Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam. He says, "Man khafa Allah, akhafa Allahu minhu kulla shay." The one who fears Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah will make everything fear him. وَمَنْ لَمْ يَخَفُ اللَّهَ أَخَافَهُ اللَّهُ مِنْ كُلِّ شَيْءٍ. And the one who doesn't fear Allah, Allah will make him fear everything. So if you fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you shouldn't fear anyone else in what you're doing. If you believe that a certain thing is wrong, speak against it in a wise way. ادعو إلى سبيل ربك بالحكمة والموعظة الحسنة. Call to the path of your Lord through wisdom and through good speech, obviously. So don't be very aggressive in your speech. Hopefully I'm not coming across as aggressive now. It's just being a bit emotional when I'm speaking, but I'm not being aggressive, inshallah. All right, so when we look at, to end it and to cut it short, when we look at the ruling of self-flagellation or tadbir, hitting the head. Religiously, there's a principle called asalatul ibaha. Asalatul ibaha means everything is halal, unless it's proven to be haram. Okay? Everything is halal. Any action that you could think about is halal, unless there's an evidence to prove that it's haram. So hitting the head, intentionally hitting the head, it's not considered as a serious harm. And according to the scholars who limit the harm to the serious harm, we can't classify it as haram, according to these scholars, most of the scholars. Now, do we accept this? We don't accept this? We'll leave that for later. But we stay with the, let's say, the mainstream. They consider it to be halal because it doesn't lead to a serious harm. But as we explained, it can't be classified as a symbolic ritual. And it can be classified as part of Jazza. So it has nothing to do with religion or promoting religion. It's just an action that you perform out of being insane. For example, if I want to say, I'm going to stand on one foot, half naked, and dance in a circle. The scholar would say to you, this is mubah, this is permissible, but it has nothing to do with religion. It can't be classified as a symbolic ritual. It can't be classified as jaza. You want to do it. It's up to you. But this is just, has nothing to do with religion. Self-flagellation or hitting the head is the same thing. Same thing as dancing on one foot. You want to do it. But it's not considered as well as part of religion or as something recommended or as one of the symbolic rituals or jaza. Alhamdulillah, I see most of our maraja today, they have the opinion that if any ritual from the rituals of Imam al-Hussein that are known as the rituals of Imam al-Hussein, if they cause harm to the image of the Shia school of thought, they become haram. This is the view of most of the maraja. But they say it is up to you to find out whether it causes harm or not. And then you have some scholars who classify it as haram, completely haram, because they say it's causing harm to the image of Abi Abdullah alayhi salam. They call it hukum thanawi. And based on that, when we see especially how these rituals are making people escape from the path of the Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam and away from the path of the Ahlul Bayt, and it's not helping in promoting and it's giving a bad image, there's no place except to say that this action is forbidden and should be stopped. And we should try to find new rituals or new methods in promoting the message. Some people are scared. They say if we let this ritual go and we stay silent in front of those who try to stop it, then you will move from hitting the heads to other rituals. You will start speaking about beating the chest or other rituals that are performed, wearing black, and so on. And I'll say, what's wrong with that? Even if you move to all the rituals and you come, and in fact, you should go and study every ritual that is performed and see how effective it is on a practical level. If it's too effective on a practical level, do it, promote it. If it's not effective, then logically, forget all the narrations, the verses, logically, you should change it, modify it, in order for it to help the cause that you believe in the message of Abi Abdullah alayhi salam. So inshallah, I'll stop here. There's obviously more to that discussion, but I'll just stop here. And I hope that this was beneficial for the brothers and sisters who are listening. And if there's any questions, I'm ready to answer. If not, we'll end it.
Thank you, Sheikh. That was very insightful. I'd like to open up the floor for questions. I actually did have a question myself, Sheikh.
Yes.
Just wanted to know what rituals are considered as a symbolic ritual that can help us promote the religion?
So one of the rituals is al-Hajj. For example, when we look at the verse, ذَلِكَ وَمَنْ يُعَظِّمْ شَعَائِرَ اللَّهِ فَإِنَّهَا مِنْ تَقْوَى الْقُلُوبِ, referring to Hajj. This is an obligation, and it's considered as a ritual. So all the term sha'a'ir in the Quran, it refers to Hajj. Okay, it's part of religion. Then when it comes to for example, the Shia school of thought, or to Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, as I explained in the two sessions, it's general. The symbolic rituals are general. So anything that helps in promoting the message of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam in a positive way can be classified as a symbolic ritual. Anything. It doesn't need to have a textual proof, unless you accept the view of the scholars that say it must have a textual proof. If you accept that view, like Sayyid al-Luhui, then we say that crying is a symbolic ritual, because there's evidence for authentic narrations in regards to crying on Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. Remembering Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam in different ways, through a poem, through a lecture, something, is a symbolic ritual, you know. But when it comes to chest beating, for example, it's an emotional reaction. Okay, maybe you'll find certain narrations here and there referring to it indirectly, but as the way it is practiced today by the Shia, there's no evidence for it. But it doesn't mean that it's haram. You know, it depends on how it's practiced and so on. So the main ritual in the if you want, in the movement or in the cause of Imam Hussein alayhi salam would be crying. And this is something that was practiced by the Imams alayhi salam for political reasons, as we mentioned. And also another ritual is the ziyarah of Imam Hussein alayhi salam in general. The ziyarah in general, not only arba'in, in general, it's a ritual for also political reasons.
Thank you. I see we have Samir with the question. If you can go ahead.
You're muted, I think.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, now I can hear you.
Okay, so I've heard that the Imams were only sad on the day of Ashura, and they only sort of showed their sort of grieving face on the day itself, on the 10th of Muharram. However, and then just recently I heard one of the Maulanas say that when Yazid gave the permission for them to now be released from the dungeons and whatever, Bibi Zainab asked for 3 days of sort of mourning, or remembrance of her brother. I mean, I find it that we have 10 days. I mean, can you explain why we do 10 days or 12 days of the 1st of Muharram? And then we have Ashr Zainabiyah, which is another 10 days. I mean, she herself asked for 3. So I'm kind of confused.
Thank you very much. Islamically, the recommendation or the istihbab is to have 3 days for someone that dies. After 3 days, there's no commemoration for the death. So there's no, let's say, 5 days, or after a month, or after 40 days, and so on, or 10 days. There's 3 days Islamically. That's the istihbab, if you want, Islamically. So if it's proven about Sayyidah Zainab alayhi salam, because also it needs to be proven that she did 3 days when she was released, or that she was in the dungeons and so on. That's a different story what happened in Asham. If it's proven, then it meets the recommendation, the Islamic recommendation of having the commemoration of someone that dies for 3 days. Now, for the 10 days of Muharram, obviously it happened in 1 day. Like the whole martyrdom of Imam Hussein alayhi salam, the battle happened in 1 day. We have some narrations from the Imams alayhim salam, regardless of the authenticity of some of the chains, that they used to commemorate from the 1st of Muharram to the 10th. And it's narrated that when the 1st of Muharram starts, they would not even smile from the beginning of Muharram. So based on these narrations and also the historical practices of the Shia in commemorating these 10 days, they became, if you want, sacred. And obviously because you have some narrations referring to them, so it became something that is practiced the 10 days. And that's fine. I think it's something good in commemorating the 10 days of Muharram, and it helped the Shia a lot, by the way. It helped them a lot. The Shia school of thought was based or built on 2 principles. And I don't know if I mentioned that before. It's built on 2 principles, on holiness and oppression. Having a holy leader, someone that is pure, sincere, and on oppression. This is how they promoted their school of thought. And the 10 days, it helped them a lot in doing that. And it's still helping us until today, as we explained previously. Now, the problem that some respected people in the Shia school of thought, they started overdoing it. So after the 10 days of Muharram, they do till the 40th of Imam al-Hussein, so till the 20th of Safar. And then from the end of Safar, they have the 10 days of, they call him the Muhammadi 10 days, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad, the 10 days of the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi. And then the 10 days of Sayyidah Zainab, and then the 10 days of Sayyidah Zahra alayhi salam. So you spend the whole year having 10 days commemorating the martyrdom of each imam or each respected Islamic personality. And this is something not healthy. In fact, it is something very toxic. And I don't want someone to misunderstand me when I say this, but to stop your whole life. And I know some people who stop their entire life, their work, they stop everything. They don't even send their kids to school during these nights of Imam al-Hussein or Sayyidah Zahra or Sayyidah Zainab. And this is not right. We learn from the way the Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam used to commemorate the martyrdom of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. We learned that they had an active commemoration. They were active. They were using it to stay active, to encourage people to be active and not to just make them dead sheep that sit in a place and just mourn and go back home doing nothing. This is what it turned to stop an entire country sometimes, like in Iraq. They stop an entire country. They don't send students to school just for the commemoration of a certain event. This is something not healthy. So we need to balance and to rationalize our emotions and to rationalize our love that we have to the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam. And the previous generation, they started doing this, and maybe it was helpful for them. May Allah reward them for that. But anyway, the new generation, they are not that interested in the commemoration of these 10 days, and they don't even have time to do that. So I don't believe it will stay in the Shia school of thought for a long time. Most of the new generation will stop practicing these rituals that were performed by the previous generations. And maybe the 10 days of Muharram will stay there, inshallah. Hopefully I was able to answer the question.
Yes, thank you very much. That was perfect.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I think we have Murtaza raising his hand. Murtaza, you can go ahead.
Sheikh, Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam.
Sheikh, you mentioned that religious symbolism is the main crux of it is to spread the message of Islam.
Yes.
And we are involved in so much of religious symbolism compared to the majority Muslims, mainly the Ahl Sunnah, and they don't have any kind of religious symbolism. So how do we reconcile our overdoing of our religious symbolic activities compared to them having virtually none? And they are spreading the Islam more, or is it diluting our efforts to spread the Shia Islam?
Thank you very much. Saying that Ahlul Sunnah, they don't have symbolic rituals is not very accurate. If we understand that the symbolic rituals are not part of religion, again, not part of religion, it's just means to promote the religion, then we can say that Ahlul Sunnah, they have more symbolic rituals than us, because they are, as you said, more active in preaching their religion and doing da'wah than the Shia school of thought. And this in itself, this preaching and da'wah, is a symbolic ritual. The problem is that when we think of a symbolic ritual, we limit it to the rituals that we perform in Ashura or in Muharram. And this is not correct. These are some of the examples of the rituals, that some of them are accepted, some of them are not. But symbolic rituals in general are anything that promotes the religion. So let's say your social media account can be a symbolic ritual if it helps in promoting the religion. This session can be a symbolic ritual for promoting the religion. So in that sense, they do have sha'a'ir or symbolic ritual. And also obviously with the wajib symbolic ritual, which is the Hajj, it does exist for all Muslims. Now, why they are more active or successful, it's due to them taking the action. And this is something that can change a lot of things. You see, the Shia school of thought, until today, they still react to certain thoughts that start in the Islamic nation. So most of the books, if you look, for example, at the books of theology, most of the books in theology, they are in response to certain beliefs that exist in the Islamic school of thoughts. So they try to respond to those who believe in Al-Khilafah, respond to those who believe in Al-Jabr, respond to those who believe in X and Y. We always work as a reaction in the Shia school of thought. And we haven't reached a time where we take the action. And there's a big difference, because when you take the action, you have the power to make everyone circulate around the space that you create. But when you react to something that starts with others, then you'll be limited in your movement. And this is why the Sunni school of thought in certain places are more active, because they take the action. And the Shia school of thought are more passive, because they just react to the things that are happening around them. And inshallah, this should be a message. This is something that I personally practice myself. I refuse to respond to anyone, or even those who attack me, those who say whatever they want. I refuse to respond to anyone. I always take the action, and I let others react to the actions that I take, because then I limit them to the space that I create. And always, if you want to be successful in promoting your religion, don't give time for people to rest. So when you take an action, don't stop and just look at the way they are reacting. Take another action, a third action, a fourth action. Keep them busy in reacting, because then you'll have the power to reach the highest levels that you want. That's some political point that you can benefit from, inshallah.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Sheikh. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Do we have any more questions from our audiences? I think that will be it. So, inshallah, thank you, Sheikh, for these unique lectures. Inshallah, we look forward to similar exciting topics in the future. To those who are viewing this, please do consider subscribing to Islaah and click the bell icon so you can get notified automatically when we release new lectures. So thanks again once, Sheikh, and hope inshallah to see you soon.
Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam.
Thank you for watching. Please consider subscribing. Also click the bell icon and choose the all option to get notified for upcoming videos automatically.